One Fine 69C. I'm not even sure if the Yamahas are bad, but I don't like HPDIs just because of the high amount of pressure. It just doesn't seem to me that high pressure anything warrants reliability. This clip is brought to you by PartsView.com. Save money on all your boat or engine parts when you use the link and discount codes in the description below. I don't know if I could say that. I think the 150-200 Yamaha HPDI was a super reliable engine. The 3.3 250, 300s, maybe a little less reliable, but most of those HPDIs, the real problem and killer to an HPDI was poor fuel and lack of use. So if you got poor fuel or you're using ethanol, which is a really hard decision to make unless you're burning it all up. If you're using your boat normally and you fill your tank up once every, say, month or 2 months, then ethanol is a terrible choice. So most of the time, dirty fuel, old fuel, ethanol, that poor fuel quality is what killed most of the HPDIs. It wasn't that it was just unreliable, and not to mention that the 425 and the 450, the XTOs, those are direct injection too. And those things have almost double the amount of pressure as the HPDI did. At wide open throttle, the XTO is doing 2,800 to 3,200 PSI. So it's way more pressure, but yeah, it's poor fuel quality. That's the biggest problem that HPDI had, was poor fuel quality and people just letting them sit. Because when they sat, that's when everything's just sitting there rusting. It's not good. So lack of maintenance, just like the other guy said the other week. What did he say? He said, Yamahas don't die, they're murdered from maintenance. That's a true statement. Uwu says, I have an 07 225 Yamaha and it runs rough at idle or dies, but only on the way back to the dock, not going out. That is interesting. So I don't know exactly if I'm reading it wrong or if the way you're saying it is very difficult, because you don't give us a lot of information here. So basically what you're saying is it runs rough at idle or dies, but only on the way back to the dock, not going out. So that means we got an engine here. You got a 225 07. So we're talking about an old F225 with the individual throttle bodies, the old girl, 3.3. So we got a Yamaha 4-stroke, runs, idles, and gets wide open throttle. Everything runs perfect. No issues. It is awesome when you're leaving and running around. Now, whenever you turn around and head back to the dock, now all of a sudden it runs rough at idle and dies. I don't know about that. You're probably trying to say that basically the engine doesn't want to go home. That's a problem here. You want to go home, but the Yamaha wants to stay out. So honestly, I think the problem is most likely is temperature at idle. So those 225s, somewhere in there on the fuel line in the VST is a relief valve. It's like a recirculation relief valve thing. I would be looking into that, and it could potentially be a temperature problem. But any of those 07 225 run rough at idle and dies is most likely that relief valve is messed up. So I'd be looking at that. Ooh. Based on the information, Matthew Sharp says, what does it entail adding an offshore bracket in regards to the fuel lines, power and data cables, hydraulic steering lines, etc.? Is there an easy way of extending them or have to run new? So this is a phenomenal question. Now, honestly, you would generally want to run new. And the reason I say that is because if you put extensions on there, technically, yeah, you can extend everything. But for the most part, depending on the engine and the rigging, most of them have extension harnesses. Mercury's got extension harnesses. Yamaha's got extension harnesses. Most of them, you can extend your harness from the back of the boat to the back of the engine once you push it 2 feet back. But same thing for your cables. Your fuel lines, you would really just run a new fuel line from your water separator bracket to the engine. I wouldn't necessarily put a splice in there, but you could splice the fuel line. You could put power posts, attach your battery cables to the power posts at the transom, and then run new cables from there to the engine. You could run the extension harnesses for your main harness from the transom to the engine. You can put butt connectors and splicers or couplers in your steering hoses and add 3 feet of steering hose there. So yeah, pretty much everything could be spliced and put back there. But now all of a sudden, depending on the situation, your transom and the type of boat you got, you have now added failure points to every single one of those items. Like, if you put the splice in the fuel line, there's a failure point for an issue. There's a point for corrosion, for a blockage, for an air leak. Your data harness, you can get water on that data harness. It could get into that connection. That coupler could fail. The connection could fail. Where it goes together, that could fail. The power posts, now you've got power posts in the back that are going to be corroding. It's exposed to the weather, so that's a failure point. Your hydraulic lines, now you've got a coupler there, that is a failure point. So realistically, you would want to run new, but technically, yes, you could put extensions on there and make it work. Again, depending on the transom situation, if you can get them in a dry location to where they're going to be protected and it's not going to be an issue, then the extension is probably not a big deal, especially the fuel line. There's no reason to put a splice on a fuel line when you've probably got a water separator bracket right there, and opposed to just adding 3 feet of fuel hose, why wouldn't you just get 5-6 feet of fuel hose and just run a new one from your water separator bracket? Totally understand the battery cables though, running from the front to the back. And, now you got to run 25 feet plus of battery cables at $150 a roll. So, or $100 a roll, depending on what you get. So yeah. And then an extension harness, your extension harness is probably going to be, depending on the brand, could be $100, could be a couple $100. So the steering hoses, you're going to have to buy the couplers, and you're going to have to buy 3 feet steering hoses, or depending on the type of hydraulic steering you have, you could you can make the hoses. So by the time you add all that up, it might be easier to add new. So, yes, you can extend them. Do you want to? Now, if you enjoyed this clip, you can watch the full episode over here, or you can watch another one over here.